This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Benerofe, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening, who are the newsmakers, what's in store for the future. The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world. John Bailey with the Dean of Journalism in White Plains, Jim Benerofe, and this is the City News Roundup Show. And here are this week's stories.
And here are the stories from White Plains Week for the week of June 14th, 2019. Court of Appeals refuses to review court approval of Catherine Cat Bresler petition signatures. There will be a Democratic primary election June 25th between Ms. Bresler, Nadine Hunt Robinson, Victoria Presser, and Jennifer Puja to select who runs in November on the Democratic line. June 18th, last day to file for absentee ballots. County legislator recommends voting changes for county based on January New York legislature changes. Service Employees International Union 32BJ threatens strike of commercial office buildings if a fair contract is not signed by December 31st. Negotiations start in September. League of Women Voters attracts over 50 to review future of the city issues. Plans monthly review issue by issue at the library in September. City sets July 2nd for fireworks. Rent control reforms prevents targeting apartments for rent increases in many circumstances. Stuns landlords. Governor Cuomo signs bill making vaccinations mandatory. Meanwhile, Westchester County awaits governor's signing sales tax increase to eliminate 2019 deficit.
Thank you, Jim. And can we go to the White Plains video newsreel March of Time? And the big story, of course, is there is going to be a primary on June the 25th. The League of Women Voters is having a candidates forum for the Democratic primary on Monday, June 17th, 7 to 9 p.m. at the White Plains Public Library Auditorium, and there are the participants in the forum. And next slide, please. And there is how you get to answer and ask questions. You have to contact the League of Women Voters and send questions for the meeting to lwvwp.candidateforums@gmail.com with the subject line, question for candidates. So that is that second paragraph there. The information is also on my website. And questions can be asked in person at the forum. However, you have to submit the cards just before you go into the forum, and that is at the White Plains Library. And one thing, we want to get some dates in your head. Next slide, please. You have to, if you cannot be here for the primary on June the 25th, you have to pick up an absentee ballot on the registration, a request for an absentee ballot on the left, and then that has to be turned in by Tuesday, June the 18th.
Yeah, well, I want to mention the primary is June 24th.
No, it's the 25th.
Oh, said something about the 24th up there.
That's when you have to mail in your absentee ballot at the latest. Okay, that's the big difference. So once you get your absentee ballot, you have to mail it in postmarked June the 24th or drop it off at the Board of Elections.
I recommend dropping it off at the Board of Elections.
I'd recommend that too. Right.
I don't
Take a
think you'll get
photograph
it.
right, of you dropping it off. But now, moving on with that, I would just like to, next slide please. The reason Kat Bressler is now on the ballot is that last Friday, the Court of Appeals up in Albany declined review of the Democratic Party's in White Plains appeal of the appellate court decision, which rejected their view that the Board of Elections screwed up and approved the signatures wrongly, which is really interesting that they would do that, because this is a real bad PR move. It's one thing challenging in the appellate court, and I will always remember that. And I will bring it up every time they do it, because it's wrong. You're disenfranchising when you do that. Now, next slide. We had a protest bringing up the fact that Service Employees International Union 32BJ workers still have not been rehired on Wednesday. It was also a day when they celebrated Justice for Janitors Day, and the union made a strong case for rehiring the workers at number 1, what is the name of that street?
Barker Avenue?
Yes, right. Number 1 Barker Avenue, which is shown in the lower left, and also number 3 Barker Avenue, where the Department of Motor Vehicles is moving to, or at least wants to, hasn't quite approved yet, but come on, somebody has to be watching up there in Albany as to where you move your statewide commissions. Do they really want to move the DMV in a building that is using non-union labor? It's an interesting point. And I think it's some leverage that the county could use by jawboning to get them to turn around their feelings and at least bring back in the union. I mean, it's a disgrace. This is such a union-oriented state. What do you think about this issue? This EIU.
I kind of lean towards favoring the unions. I think that things tend to run better where there's some kind of group control over all employees. And there are some times when I suppose I would come out not in favor of unions doing something, but I think basically unions have done a very effective job. And
well, you get a higher quality of standards with the union and reliable employees when you use the cleaning companies that are non-union, as is being pointed out by the SIE services.
To select something from Mountain
32BJ.
We don't want fake employees.
That's well, perhaps. Well, not that, but they are really exploited, the non-union workers.
Yeah.
They don't get vacations, they don't get benefits, they don't get holidays, and they are exploited. And or so the union feels.
Yeah.
But they do. The union has done a great job for them, and they are going to have negotiations with the commercial properties coming up in September, and the contracts are up all across the whole Northeast. So this is actually going to affect a lot of people if the the negotiations don't go smoothly. And you can hear about it on Peel to Be Heard next week on Thursday and Friday. We interviewed them Thursday and Saturday. But moving along, we have another issue that came up this week. The natives are restless. There was a forum Wednesday, Jim. And if we can have the slide, there we are. It is the League of Women Voters getting involved, and they're holding focus meetings and discussions on the city's future beginning monthly in September. And this was the kickoff of this grassroots effort. Next slide, please. And they asked the question, what qualities would you like to see characterize the city in the next 10 years? You know, how would you change the city in the next 10 years? And it was a forum divided into a series of tables in which, next slide, some of the ideas are very familiar. And there are some of them, Jim. Zoning, affordable housing. What is affordable? High-rise apartments, not affordable to young workers. Lousy taxes, well, everybody complains about those. Parking, developers doing away with affordable housing. There is the list, and here's some more. Next slide. Next slide, please. Solar panels, all homes, on all homes and businesses. Developers giving money for open space. Provide guidelines for developers as to how they can build in White Plains and what they can build. Environment incentive breaks to homeowners. And these all came out of tables in which a collection of 50 people alternated discussing each of the topics. Environment, transportation, etc. And complete listings of all the suggestions will be sent to the mayor with more specific discussions coming up in the fall. And Stephen Cohen, who is the president of the League of Women Voters, organized this with other members of the board, and it was based on the common ground discussions that were being held at the library, and it gave him this idea. And what do you think of this? This sounds very, very much like developing a comprehensive plan.
It sort of sounds like developing a comprehensive plan. I think planning, I don't know if we need a comprehensive plan per se. I think that's trying to put down all of what can be done, and there's too much change, and things change too fast now to take a plan that's going to work for the next 10 years. I think there should be, the planning department should have the state of planning in the community once a year. And they should go over all the things that could be done or need to be done.
What a brilliant idea.
I also think that I was looking at the things that people wanted. I have solar energy in my house, and my Con Ed bill has, shall we say, dropped tremendously. I think that the electric charges on my bill last month were maybe, and I'll bring in the bills and show them if they want.
Okay.
My electric was $1 and something from my ESCO, and from Con Edison I think it was $20, and it reversed itself in another bill, but that's what it was.
That's still extraordinarily low for the supply.
Yes.
I have, still have to pay the Con Ed.
When I put in I have a power wall, a Tesla power wall. Actually, I have 2 power walls. But they said the chances are I will have no electric bill at all, and that's really what seems to be happening.
Extraordinary.
Now, you can't say put solar energy necessarily on all houses. You got to make sure that the buildings that are involved have good sun exposure. My house happens to have very good sun exposure.
You know, what intrigued me when I was in Florida just 2 weeks ago was how little solar panels there are in Florida.
Yeah.
What is the reason for that?
Well,
The Sunshine
my
State?
electricity, I have a house about the same size in
Yeah.
Florida as I have up here. And my electric bill has been considerably less. It runs between 2 and sometimes maybe gets up to 400 a month. And I have
Air conditioning.
air conditioning 24/7.
Yes.
So, that's up here it would be more like heating and air conditioning, but there it's
You
basically air
would
conditioning.
think that solar panels should be encouraged more down in that state.
Yeah.
I would think. And we're trying to discuss why it's
Yeah.
not. Now, another thing that came out this week, and now we have we go to the County Board of Legislators annual report on voting changes. If we can have that, please. And what do they want to do? This was put out by Chairman Ben Boykin, and this is the New York State Voting Reform Laws Board of Legislators report on how to implement it. But what this report, which I have with me here, it says, Jim, there are 600,000 registered voters in Westchester, and the committee on the Board of Legislators that studied this are recommending they vote, early voting this is, at 15 to 25 sites throughout the county, 2/3 south of I-287. And the 15 locations are listed there on the left. Fortunately, White Plains is one of them. The early voting will take place for 2 weeks before the election. The polls will be placed in libraries, municipal buildings, and county buildings, not regular polling sites. Funding is being requested from the state for voting security and new machines, and the goal is to have anyone vote at any of these approved sites in Westchester. And there's a lot of issues here because A, how much early voting will there be? And again, it's the money problem. Because if you have to buy new voting machines, what do you think about early voting in Westchester?
I really can't state a point of view. I would have to study. I think if they're going to do stuff like that, I think they should have an election staff, at least a skeleton staff, working year-round.
Well, this is a point that the board does make, that the state law that was passed to do all this is pointing out that they have to have someone overseeing this. But it is going to change. Now, I believe it's going to be in effect this year. They haven't confirmed that. But the county, there are a lot of decisions to be made, and the legislature has to approve these suggestions. Now, big thing this week from Albany was that the legislature passed sweeping controlled rent legislation.
Well, it's not only
And-
rent control, it's rent stabilized buildings also.
Right.
I think the issue is fairly complex. I'm not sure. I mean, landlords are stunned, and maybe it's not entirely equitable what they're doing. But I will say that we've got to really start paying attention to the real middle class, which is not being done politically in this country. And you've got to have really affordable housing. And I think that there are some things that have to be done. I think that they've got to pay more attention to who and how buildings are being managed. I mean, and I know this from my own experience, landlords tend to manage sometimes with regard to getting financing that doesn't necessarily entirely go into the building, but it's money to take out. And the Institute, I think it's the Institute for Real Estate Management, which is run, I think, by realty boards or something. I'm not sure how that's set up, but they have a program where you become a certified property manager. And I think I don't know what percentage of these landlords have certified property managers working for them on a full-time basis. But the experience that they have to have, it's like being a CPA. And I think that we've got to pay much more attention to real significant management. And I managed a lot of rent-controlled apartments, true, many years ago. But so I know something about that. Was only rent control, and I knew all the regulations at the time, and I read the law and everything else. Since then, they've put in rent stabilization. They've put in other things, and rent control was supposed to have been phased out, and theoretically, the free market should work. But because landlords get into these things of doing things for financial benefits that have nothing to do with the buildings, that's not how things always work out.
This is how the press treated it. Let's see those two slides of the Times reports on this. And next slide, 2. And that shows you the Times analysis of what the bill does. Vacancy decontrol is eliminated. The number of the controlled apartments has gone from 2 million down to 22,000.
I think that we have to really study the housing market and try to get accurate figures. I think, for instance, we have a lot of new buildings in White Plains. I don't know what their percentage of occupancy is, but I think that that information should be public.
Yeah, because
I know landlords are going to freak out, if you will, by my saying this as a landlord. But I think we have to know, they come out and they say, oh, I got 50% of the building rented. And you go by the building at night, and there is no way that 50% of that building is rented.
Yeah, we have buildings like that in this town. Vacancy bonus is eliminated. They used to be able to raise the rent 20% when the vacancy occurred. And now it's down to 6%. Oh, they also are eliminating a lot of how much you can raise it when you improve an apartment, and that's going to hurt because they're not going to improve the apartment.
Yeah, we had.
Because you can't.
I did a lot of jobs. For instance, I put in storm windows and screens on an apartment building, and you got $2 in rent per unit for it, which worked out pretty good. And you got to understand something. A lot of buildings used to be built with wooden frame windows.
Yes.
If you have wooden frame windows, you have a management expense of you got to paint those every 5 years without fail. And if you don't, you're going to get rotting. And even then, you get some rotting. You got to do it on an ongoing basis.
It appears this legislation is prepared by people who have no idea what goes on in managing a building.
Well, that's why I say I want certified property managers.
But good point. But anyway, we'll talk about this a little bit more as it goes on. But another thing they did was $200,000. If you earned $200,000 in 2 straight years, the landlord could raise a rent. Now they can no longer do that. And that again, you feel
it depends.
that's too...
Look, it depends I have 4 kids.
Yes.
If I'm living in New York City and I'm making $200,000 a year, I'm not going to raise 4 kids. I don't care what anybody says. And
that's
if the
a population problem.
and let the landlord live in the building with his $200,000 income and show us how he apportions it for his 4 kids and everything else that's involved.
That's true. Now, you said you had a book you wanted to bring to the table today?
Well, I didn't bring the book with me, but I'll mention the author and the book. I'm reading the book Cemetery Road. It's by Greg Iles, who is basically a fairly big name author. I've read 3 others of his books. The other books dealt with the fictionalization of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And the books were fantastic. I read 2,800 pages in like a month or 2.
That's good, right.
And the current book, I just started, I'm on the first 100 pages, but Greg Iles is a very entertaining author. And the book, again, is Cemetery Road.
Now, coming up, of course, we have a few days until the New York State Legislature closes shop for the summer. And they still have not passed the sales tax increase for Westchester County. Probably it will be in the omnibus bill that they always throw in at the end of the session. However, we don't know for sure whether that's going to happen. And we also do not know for sure because the county didn't get back to us on this. We asked, but hey, if they approve it next week, can you get it in place by July the 1st, which would be helpful.
What's it going to go to?
A 1% increase.
So it'll be 9%?
Yeah, something like that. But that is, that's exactly it. It's about 8 and a quarter now, so it'd be about 9%. So we await that all-important bill. Otherwise, the county is going to have to scrounge around if they can't get it in place by July the 1st. Yeah. And but we do not know what the governor's attitude is towards that. Anyway, John Bailey, Jim Benerofe, good night for White Plains Week, and get those absentee ballots in.
Good night, John.
This has been White Plains Week, news and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.